Hi, I'm Dr. Sridhar Kalyanasundaram. Welcome to my channel. Thank you for the very positive response to the video I made on thermoregulation. And similar to that, I'm going to make a few videos of basic aspects of neonatal intensive care. So these videos are going to be targeting the neonatal intensive care staff, including the junior doctors, nurses, ANNPs, and anyone else who has work in the neonatal intensive care. I would like you to participate actively if possible by entering feedbacks, comments, and do subscribe and share with your colleagues. In the next three videos, I would be describing different aspects of oxygenation. The one today is going to be a basic overview of oxygenation, why oxygen is needed, and the importance of regulating oxygen in the body. The subsequent videos will be on oxygen saturation measurement and monitoring of oxygenation, and the final video will be on oxygen toxicity as well as how much oxygen to target in the neonatal intensive care, which is one of the hot topics currently. So I'll be using a slide share of a presentation. So as I explained in this current video, we will be having a brief overview of oxygen utilization in our body, and we'll be going through the most important aspects related to the same. So we all know that very important molecules that we need for normal functioning and survival are oxygen and glucose. So without these two key molecules, we would not be surviving. Glucose is obviously a main fuel based on which all the body functions happen. The glucose breakdown in the aerobic metabolism pathway starts with glycolysis, where you have a pyruvate generated, and this pyruvate is broken down to acetyl-CoA as it enters the mitochondrion. It enters the Krebs cycle, where the acetyl-CoA is converted to oxaloacetate. In the process, it releases NADH and which enters the oxidative phosphorylation. The oxidative phosphorylation or the electron transport chain is in the mitochondria, and it's the main mechanism by which the body releases ATP, which is the energy molecule or the currency for energy, so to speak. For this aerobic pathway to function, that is to utilize the glucose appropriately to release the 30 to 34 ATP per molecule of glucose, oxygen is a key. So without oxygen, we will not be going through the aerobic pathway. We will be entering the anaerobic pathway, and unfortunately, the anaerobic pathway is not efficient. It only leads to 2 ATP production per glucose molecule, which is not viable. So this summarizes what we discussed. I know it's a bit intense, but I'll keep it brief. We don't need to go into the full details of the cycles. So when we have aerobic respiration, it starts with the glucose which undergoes glycolysis, and we have the 2-pyruvate produced. The pyruvate under aerobic conditions goes into the mitochondrion and converts to acetyl-CoA by decarboxylation. Acetyl-CoA is the starting path of Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle or tricarboxylic acid cycle. So we have the citric acid cycle, and as I said, NAD and converts to NADH, and FAD converts to FADH, and we have 6H plus produced as well. So all this will go into the electron transfer chain pathway, which is the main pathway through which the ATP is produced. In case you don't have oxygen, it goes into the anaerobic pathway, where the pyruvate gets broken down to lactic acid and ethanol by fermentation process. So acetyl-CoA is not formed, the Krebs cycle is not entered, and only 2 ATP molecules are produced as part of this process. So it's a very inefficient system if you have anaerobic metabolism. And the same happens in tissues which don't have the oxygen perfusion. So you have anaerobic conditions there, so they are not able to use aerobic glucose, aerobic fuel mechanisms. You do have lactic acid increasing in these situations, and that's why lactate is used as a marker of such conditions. The same happens with the baby born in a birth asphyxiated condition. The same happens in a baby with shock where there is poor perfusion in the periphery. So this is a simple representation of the oxidative phosphorylation, the electron transport chain. So you have coenzyme Q, cytochrome C, and various other factors. Mainly the electron transfer happens along these different stages, and it ends up giving us 30 to 34 ATP. Because of the leakage and because of the energy used in the process, even though we say up to 38 can be produced, in practice, in reality, we only get 30 to 34 ATPs which are produced. The reason I started explaining this is for you to know why we need oxygen, because that's the key as to why we need to target oxygen, why we need to maintain it at an appropriate level, and why the baby suffers from lack of oxygen. So for the adequate fuel production in the body, we need oxygen along with glucose. Now, coming on to the point of oxygen uptake. Oxygen in the alveolar air gets transferred across the alveolar capillary interface. So this is the starting point, because our body excretes carbon dioxide and we consume oxygen. The oxygen exchange happens in the healthy lungs. So you might have a problem in the lungs which affect oxygen exchange. So enough oxygen doesn't enter the bloodstream, and that's how lung disease affects oxygen. Majority of the oxygen is bound to hemoglobin, almost 98+%, and a small proportion is dissolved in the plasma. So we should remember that it is this small percentage that we are actually measuring when we do the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood gas. The oxygen is then circulated to the rest of the body by the blood. So blood is just the vehicle to carry the different substrates that we need for the adequate functioning. So oxygen, glucose, etc. are carried to the tissue. Carbon dioxide and other waste products are taken out from the tissues and brought to the kidneys or the lungs to be excreted appropriately. So the blood is a vehicle to carry essential things to the different parts of the body. Oxygen is then released at the tissue level capillaries, and this produces essential oxygen for the tissue function and metabolism. So, if you understand the whole cycle of how the body works, so we get oxygen into the blood from the lungs. The hemoglobin is a main carrier, so the blood cycles to the periphery and the tissue takes up the oxygen that it needs, and then the oxygen enters the cells to help with the aerobic metabolism process to produce the energy to drive the local metabolism. So this is the same whether you're talking of the kidneys, you're talking of the muscles, you're talking of the brain, the heart. So any part of the body, aerobic metabolism is key. We mentioned that hemoglobin is a key carrier of oxygen, and this is the structure of hemoglobin. We have the four globin chains, which are the protein components. The globins can be two alpha chains, as in both fetal and adult hemoglobin, and the two beta chains in hemoglobin A. If you have two gamma chains, it becomes hemoglobin, fetal hemoglobin, and two delta chains makes hemoglobin A2. So different abnormalities of hemoglobin like sickle cell and so on alter the chemical composition of the globin chains, and in thalassemias we have less of the particular chains according to whether it is alpha thalassemia or beta thalassemia. So this is about hemoglobin. The main oxygen carrying component is the iron containing heme in the hemoglobin, and there are structural changes which happen in the hemoglobin which allow appropriate release of oxygen to the tissues and uptake depending on what is happening. So coming on to the uptake and release, we have the very important concept of the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. All of us are familiar with this. Just a quick overview of what it is so we can understand better. So we have the partial pressure of oxygen in millimeter mercury on the x-axis. We have the oxygen saturation of the hemoglobin in percentage on the y-axis. And obviously it's a sinusoidal or S-shaped curve. And the normal is in dark line, that's adult hemoglobin based. We have a shift to left, which is often the situation in the newborn period because of the high hemoglobin F that we have, and even in that you may have further shift to left or further shift to right depending on the factors we will discuss next. A shift to right may happen as well in certain situations as we will discuss. So when we say shift to left or shift to right, what we basically mean is that the shift to left will make the hemoglobin bind the oxygen more strongly. So for a given available hemoglobin oxygen level, the hemoglobin is more saturated. So suppose we have a hemoglobin a partial pressure of oxygen of 60. With the shift to right, your saturation will be around 80, while with the shift to left, your saturation will go as high as 90. So this indicates that when you have a transfusion or multiple transfusions in a newborn, the fetal hemoglobin is partly replaced by adult hemoglobin, which shifts it to the right. So what you have as a 95% saturation on day one may actually be 90% after some transfusions at the same PaO2 level. So that is one of the things we should remember, that focus on saturation range is important, but the exact number within that range is okay, and we can start accepting slightly lower saturations as a number of transfusions that the baby gets is more, and we will discuss that later as well. So shift to left is usually seen in newborns. As we said, there is more avid binding and relatively tighter release. This can happen with increased HbF, a lower level of 2,3 to DPG, and we can have hypothermia, alkalosis, hypocarbia, all shifting to the left. So even in older kids and adults, this can happen if these changes happen. And the level of 2,3 DPG, obviously, when you give transfused blood, the age of the blood has an importance in terms of the 2,3 DPG content, depending on what stabilizers we use for the bloods as well. So fresh blood usually has more 2,3 DPG, and as the age of the blood increases, 2,3 DPG keeps dropping, and that's one of the reasons we have the additional components added to the pack cells to maintain the 2,3 DPG function. And we also have a shelf life for the blood for mainly the same reason. After some time, it doesn't release the oxygen in the tissues well. So if the baby is really sick, go for a fresher bag as far as you can. And shift to right, where there is easier release to the tissue, happens with acidosis, hypercarbia, hyperthermia, reduced proportion of fetal hemoglobin, or increased 2,3 DPG. I hope this concept is clear. It's very important to understand this, so you know what we are talking of when we talk of PaO2 and saturation. Coming to the important concept of tissue oxygenation. So now we spoke of oxygen uptake into the blood and carriage in the hemoglobin. Now tissue oxygenation is actual delivery of the oxygen to the tissue. So it depends on oxygen content in the blood. Oxygen content in the blood depends on how much hemoglobin is there, as well as how effective the oxygenation is in the lungs. So if a child is anemic, for example, or if a baby is anemic, they have a lower content of hemoglobin, and their ability to carry oxygen is limited. To some extent, this is offset by increased cardiac output, as we will discuss, by increasing the heart rate. So anemia causes tachycardia for the same reason. Efficacy of oxygenation in the lungs, obviously, in a normal situation, it doesn't matter. But in the case of lung disease like a pneumonia or respiratory distress syndrome, where the oxygenation is not happening normally, this plays an important role, because if the oxygen is not getting into the blood in the first place, the tissues are not going to get enough oxygen. And that's where our importance of FiO2 that we breathe in, the need for pressure support, the need for surfactant, all these come in. The next important part that affects tissue oxygenation is the cardiac output and the tissue perfusion. So cardiac output is a component where stroke volume is times the heart rate gives you the cardiac output. So cardiac output is stroke volume times heart rate, and the stroke volume is contributed by the preload, which is the amount of blood returning back to the heart. So that indicates how much filling of the atrium is there. The degree of stretching of the atrium, the Frank-Starling law applies, and that affects the myocardial contractility. So if the heart is not filled adequately, the stretching of the muscle doesn't happen, the pump may not work as effectively. That's where you may need inotropic. And when we talk of afterload, that is the resistance to the heart pumping in the rest of the systemic circulation. So if there is a peripheral vasoconstriction, your afterload is high. And when we give inotropes, for example, like dopamine or dobutamine or any other medication, we have to think of how they impact on all these components. So a vasodilator, for example, reduces the afterload. It makes it easier for the heart to pump. Most of these medications increase the heart rate, and so the heart rate goes up, the cardiac output may increase. However, if the heart rate goes up too much, your preload may be reduced and the filling of the atria reduces, so the contractility is not going to be as effective. So excessive increase in heart rate is not a good thing in these situations. And again, if you use a strong medication like dopamine, which causes peripheral vasoconstriction, to increase the blood pressure numbers, the numbers go up, but actually if the pump is already failing, the heart has to pump even harder, so it doesn't necessarily improve the outcome for the patient. That's why we should be very careful about the choice of the medication we are using to support the blood pressure. If you don't have enough filling, the preload is an issue and we may need to give more volume. If myocardial contractility is an issue, you give inotropic agents and possibly something to lower the afterload, like a mild vasodilator like milrinone is a good choice in these situations. And if myocardial contractility is good but the systemic vessels are dilated, for example, you may give dopamine to increase the peripheral vascular resistance that will improve the blood pressure. So oxygen content is basically the amount of oxygen that is dissolved in the blood and the hemoglobin. 1 gram of fully saturated hemoglobin carries 1.3 ml of oxygen, and a small amount dissolves in the plasma. So this is a very small percentage, 0.0031 ml per deciliter of blood. So for all practical reasons, this can be ignored, except that this is the measure that we use for the PaO2 on the blood gases. This correlates usually with the extent of saturation. However, we should remember that saturation reflects the saturation of whatever hemoglobin is there in the child. So if you have only 10 grams of hemoglobin, your actual content of oxygen will be low, but the saturation may still be normal. So you should remember that anemia is one factor we should think of in terms of oxygen content of the blood. So normal oxygen content is approximately 20 ml of oxygen per deciliter, depending on the site from which the blood is sampled. Obviously, arterial blood has more oxygen content, and it drops to the capillaries, and then in the venous blood, whatever is extracted is subtracted from this total. So as I said, in the steady state, 4 to 5 ml per deciliter is utilized in the tissue. So the venous blood will have about 5 ml less, so 15 ml in the venous blood. We have a substantial reserve if the blood flow is reduced or demand for oxygen increases. So you can say 5 times or 4 times the reserve in normal conditions. After we have the oxygen content, we look at oxygen delivery. This is the amount of oxygen transported from the lungs to the microcirculation. Oxygen delivery depends on the cardiac output and the oxygen content of the blood. And as the cardiac output in the newborn is about 250 ml per kilo per minute, and the oxygen content is 20 ml per deciliter, that means 20 ml per deciliter and 250 is 2.5 times that. It's 50 ml per minute is the oxygen delivery in normal conditions. After you get to the oxygen delivery, we talk of the oxygen consumption, which is actually the amount consumed in the peripheral tissue. So once the blood reaches from the arterioles to the capillary circulation, oxygen goes into the tissue as per the needs of the tissue, and the rest of it will stay in the blood, which comes back to the venous circulation. So the difference between the arterial and the venous oxygen will give you the oxygen consumption, and that is multiplied by the cardiac output. And the resting oxygen consumption, as we discussed earlier, is 4.5 to 7 ml per kg per minute. And suppose you are studying for the exam, for example, or you're preparing for a presentation, your brain is working more, so your oxygen consumption in the brain is more. If you're sleeping or you're just watching a video to relax, you may be finding a lower consumption in the brain. So brain is actually a quite avid user of both glucose and oxygen. That's why if you are sitting through a whole day in the clinic, you feel tired even though you have not done any physical activity. When we talk of oxygen measurement, we'll be talking a little bit about near infrared spectroscopy, and this is the tool which actually measures or monitors the oxygen consumption in the tissue. So you actually get a tissue level picture. So to summarize this video, oxygen is essential for normal functioning, as we saw. Lack of oxygen leads to anaerobic metabolism. Lactic acidosis sets in, and we have complications like hypotension, shock, and the brain is affected as well. If there is low oxygen to the brain, you may have fits and other complications. So an altered sensorium which happens in hypotension or shock mainly happens from reduced glucose and oxygen delivery to the brain. The fetus is in a hypoxic state, but it has adapted. So there is a high cardiac output, a high fetal hemoglobin, high hemoglobin as well. And the same adaptation can happen in cyanotic heart disease to an extent where even after birth, the baby's metabolic process have stayed in the relatively hypoxic state as the baby has never seen a high PaO2 content. Same way, the PPH in babies can manage to an extent as long as there is no acidosis building up. Our target oxygen should be a level where we don't flog the lungs. So we should preserve as much as possible, support the physiology as long as the body is compensating. Adequate oxygenation needs careful monitoring and titration of the oxygen delivery, which will be one of the topics that we will discuss next. So I hope this video is useful, and I need you to focus on sharing it and commenting and contributing to the discussion as well. And do subscribe, do share with colleagues who might be interested, and the notifications bell next to the subscribe button is important as well. So if you turn it on, you'll be informed when I produce more similar videos. So thank you for watching. I hope it's useful.